Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinema Flow podcast. I am your host, Zach Abdulbaki, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Sean O'Connell. You may know him as the deputy editor of Comic Book Resources, CBR, as well as the former host of ReelBlend, which was my favorite podcast from 2018 to 2025. Sean is also the author of three amazing film books, With Great Power, chronicling the history of the Spider-Man film franchise, as well as released the Snyder Cut, detailing the saga of Zack Snyder's Justice League, and Bruce Willis, a career retrospective. He's one of the greatest interviewers and film journalists working today. Please welcome to the show the man, the myth, the legend, Sean the Kid O'Connell. Welcome to the show, sir.
How can I live up to that kind of intro? That's insane. Thank you, Zach. Really nice of you. And I gotta know, did you shoot me two hellos as a tribute, or do you open every show that way?
I that's just for you. No one else
All right.
gets that.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for making the time. As you know, I was a huge fan of Real Blend. For those who don't know, it was a podcast you did with Jake Hamilton and Kevin McCarthy. And the reason I want to mention it is so that audiences can go back and listen to all those interviews you guys did, because those are truly the best filmmaker interviews of that whole era.
Thank you. We were really lucky to land in a niche where it seemed at the time there was a colleague of ours, Josh, over at MTV, who was doing his Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, and he was focusing heavily on actors, Josh Horowitz, and still does, but has broadened the scope a little bit to take on directors. And so he was doing actors, and so we, not that we like consciously decided to do it, but we always wanted to talk to filmmakers. We wanted to give filmmakers a longer platform to be able to dig into their films, the films that they were promoting, and then films that they had worked on prior to. And so it really, for a couple of years there, looked like we were running on a good track where like a big press junket would come around and Happy, Sad, Confused would end up getting the actors, and then Real Blend would get the directors. And so because of that, like over the years, we got to speak to so many incredible filmmakers, that we just feel truly blessed to be able to sit across from. Ridley Scott multiple times, Christopher Nolan a couple of times. Yeah, it was insane. We had a really good run. We had a really good run. It was a lot of fun doing it.
Absolutely. I mean, the show genuinely meant a lot to me, and it's a huge reason why I created this show. And whenever I score a big interview, I always try to come up with thoughtful questions the way you guys did. And I believe the first two episodes I ever listened to were the Quentin Tarantino interviews for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think there was
Wow.
a short one, and then volume two was the longer one afterwards. But then
Right.
I really became a fan during COVID when you guys interviewed Judd Apatow for King of Staten Island. I think that's when you guys started putting the video on YouTube, and that's when I started watching the whole thing with the reviews and everything. And now the legacy lives on. You know, we have Kevin's podcast on film and Jake's Takes YouTube channel and all the great work you're doing at CBR. So the Larry Crown spirit lives on.
And what's funny is when we started to do Real Blend, and I'm sure I've said this, we never wanted to do interviews. Like that was never our intention. It was always the plan of just creating a show that felt like, because prior to doing the podcast together, the three of us would sit around and just talk movies because that's what we loved. And we were all covering film, and we were all working for different outlets that would bring us to press events around the country, and the three of us would gravitate, to a corner of the room together and just start, trading conversations about old films and current films. And so when I was given the opportunity at Cinema Blend, the website I used to work for, they were like, look, if you were to do a podcast, because everybody was trying to kick around ideas, what would you do? And I was like, well, I kind of just want a podcast of like my friends, talking, but we'll cover news, and we'll cover things that are happening, and we'll do awards conversations and stuff. But because we all did interviews as our full-time job, we were like, no, we don't want to do that. But then one of the very first, after doing several episodes, Netflix came around and offered us Alfonso Cuarón when he was promoting Roma, and then we were all like, well, we can't say no to Quran. Like, that's incredible. And we realized in the preparation for that we came up with our questions. All three of us came up with our questions individually, and they were all so different. like the things that we wanted to know were so different, and we found a flow to them where we were like, all right, well then you ask that and then I'll ask this, and we'll put together like a rhythm to it, and we realized we enjoyed doing that, and then other PR personalities said, okay, well, can you take? I think we got Robert Rodriguez shortly after that, and then the snowball just kept rolling down the hill, and we couldn't say no. But what happened was it became really like it was a blessing and a curse. It became a bit of a burden where every week we wanted to get a good interview, and there isn't always something great coming out. I look at the slate of like movies that are coming out this year, and how you can go certain weeks where like there's only one big movie opening, or potentially not a big movie, where the putting out as much stuff as they did. And I know that it would be more of a challenge to keep the show going at the level that we wanted it to. But that's how we kind of landed on doing interviews.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the interviews sucked people in because that's how I found it from Quentin, and Judd Apatow. But then I stayed for like the premium show. You guys used to have a premium show where you'd answer
Yeah.
mailbag questions and play games. And honestly, that really became my favorite part of the show, just the three of you guys and Gabe also.
Well, that's very nice of you, because the premium show I think reflects what I initially thought the show would be, which is just us being idiots, because we all have, again, unique senses of humor, and when we can put the wall down, and talk freely about movies that we love, and not have to be driven by what's in the box office now, or what the top story is, and we can just go off on a stupid tangent about Kill Bill being two movies, or how much I hate Forrest Gump, or whatever topic happened to be coming to mind, or someone asks a question, and then we're able to go down rabbit holes. Like, I wanted that freedom to just now. Would that work every single week? Maybe not. People might get tired of it, but we had a lot of fun sort of showcasing our personalities.
Well, it was the best show. And I have one more thing to discuss regarding ReelBlend, and then we'll move
Sure.
on to the next topic. You guys did a 2025 fantasy draft where you predicted the highest rated movies of the year according to Rotten Tomatoes. Would
Okay.
you like to know the results and who won?
So I've been told that I won.
You did.
Is that accurate? Yeah. Did I
It
win
is
by a
accurate.
lot?
You won by quite a bit. Uh,
Wow. See, should have kept the show going.
do you know what movies each of you picked?
No, I have no idea.
Would you like me to read it real quick?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay,
please.
I'll give you the movies and the scores. Kevin chose Marty Supreme, which had a 93%,
Okay.
Sinners, which had a
Oh,
97,
yeah.
Wicked for Good, which had a 66,
Yeah, that
The
hurt.
Monkey, which had a
Ooh.
77,
Ooh. Okay.
Now You See Me 3, which had a 61,
Okay.
Warfare, that had a 92,
Okay.
Black Bag had a 96,
Okay. Soderbergh. Yeah.
Another Simple Favor, which had a 58,
That's a random pick.
Black Phone 2, which had a 72,
Okay.
Keeper, which had a 49.
I don't even know what that is.
It's
Is
a
that Osgood Perkins?
Yeah, so he
Okay.
double dipped with Osgood, and
Gotcha.
his average was 76.1.
Okay. All right. Not terrible.
Yeah, and then Jake chose Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which had an 80.
80 for that film. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Avatar: Fire and Ash, which had a 66.
Oh, that is a 66. Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, Cameron.
Yeah, the same score as Wicked, which is interesting.
Wow.
Or Wicked.
Interesting. Yeah, that is interesting.
28 Years Later, which had an 88.
That should be higher. That's a much better movie.
He chose the Trey Parker Matt Stone movie, which never came out, but let's just say it had a 100, just
Okay.
just for the sake. It had a 100.
Okay. Sure.
One Battle After Another, which had a 94.
Good. Good call.
Elio, which had an 83,
Okay. Pixar. Safe.
The Running Man, which had a 62,
Oof. Yeah.
Frankenstein, which had an 85,
Okay. Okay.
Michael, which now has a 38,
Okay.
Mickey 17, which had a 78,
Okay.
and his average score was 77.4 if we consider that Trey Parker and Matt Stone had 100.
It's terrible by Jake's standards. Terrible.
I agree. He's supposed to be
Yeah.
the king of like the IMDb game and
Pretty
everything.
low. That's pretty low.
Um, and then you had Zootopia 2, which had a 91,
Okay, good call.
Superman, which had an 83,
Okay, all right.
Caught Stealing, which had an 85.
My guy, Aronofsky.
Yeah, the greatest director. F1, which had an 82.
Oh, that should be higher.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The Smashing Machine, which had a 71.
Oh, Dwayne.
Bad score, but not a bad call.
Okay.
Drop, which had an 83.
Okay. Okay.
Fantastic Four, which had an 86.
Ooh, that got higher than I thought. I thought it'd be lower.
One of my favorite films of the year was Roof Man, which had an 87.
Okay.
Begonia had an 87.
Oh, that should be higher.
And Naked Gun, which had an 87. Ver-
All right, I was really consistent across the board.
exactly. Your average was 84.2.
Well, I'll take it. I won the last game officially
Yeah.
in Real Blind history then,
Yeah.
which I think
Now
makes me the king.
it does. It does make you the king. And now I want to transition to your work at CBR, Comic Book Resources. You're
Sure.
publishing fantastic articles and interviews and discussion videos every week. I'll put a link to your page in the description. I'm curious, in what ways is your coverage at CBR different to the work you've done at previous outlets?
It's way more comics focused, which is what my passion has been. Even when I was at Cinema Blend, it was the height of the golden age of comic book movies with the MCU, everybody having peak interest in the MCU and the DCEU going through its struggles. So there was always something to cover. But my job at Cinema Blend was more open-ended. I had to cover almost everything, award seasons, festivals, which was terrific. I mean, I loved all of that, but if I had my way, I'd be doing comic stuff 100% of the time. And over at CBR, while we have, multiple verticals, all five verticals that are kind of represented in movies and TV and gaming and anime, it comics is the fuel in the engine over there, and the bulk of our traffic is coming from people who want to read about stuff that's happening in the comics world. So that has allowed me to talk to instead of directors and actors. Although I do some of that still, I get to interview people like Jason Aaron, who's working on Absolute Superman, Scott Snyder, who's doing incredible work on Absolute Batman. Plenty of other people like, on the Marvel side who we're talking to. We just did a piece yesterday about Jerry Conway, who was an influential Spider-Man writer for me, who passed away yesterday at 73. So, it's a totally different world and one that I've always been interested in, but I'm even learning what's new on that side. There's a lot of stuff that's facing that industry, challenges facing that industry in terms of like how they're going to deliver comics to a new audience, with people learning digital tools. There's NFT stuff with creators coming up with new ways to get art and individual creations in the hands of fans. I'm learning a lot more about the collectible market, which is huge. People getting into the sideshow toys, and of course, Funko's always been a major thing. So it's fandom, a lot more than it was like reporting news on the Cinema Blend side. And so yeah, I'm always interested to see kind of how it evolves.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's super fun. And I feel like the books that I read of yours when you were at ReelBlend, we should introduce those to the audience who
Sure,
listens and watches and reads everything at CBR because you have two of those books that, I think would really appeal to the comic book audience.
sure.
First up, I want to talk about Release the Snyder Cut, the crazy true story behind the fight that saved Zack Snyder's Justice League. I'm a huge audiobook fan, so I listened to this when it came out, and it was narrated by George Newbern, who played Superman in the Justice League series on Cartoon Network in the early 2000s. One thing
Yep.
I love about this book is that it's not just about the Snyder Cut, it's about like the movement. It's about a community of people who found each other on the internet and did everything they could to support their favorite artists and have them complete their vision. There are a lot of interesting themes that go along with that, like artistic integrity versus commerce. Is that what enticed you to tell this story? Because you started writing the book way before the Snyder Cut was announced or released on HBO Max.
Yeah, so that was a beat that I kind of just absorbed at Cinema Blend because I was writing a lot of comic stuff. But then truly, I became really fascinated by the way that that fan base at the time was using social media to unify themselves globally in a fight that I would have told you was fruitless. Like I didn't think they were going to succeed. I thought that there was far too much that had to happen to the cut of Zach's movie for it to ever get released. And I didn't think that the egos of the different parties involved at the studio level would ever let it happen, and especially not as quickly as it did. Like if it were going to happen, maybe it would be years down the line. But what I wanted to do was capture something that was of that moment, which was the crazy stunts that this fan base was coming up with and funding like on their own, like really silly stuff like flying an airplane over Warner Brothers studios in Burbank with release a Snyder Cut banner hanging behind them. And they lucked into something that almost every other movement that I've seen, since they found something that the other ones didn't have, which was a slogan that caught on. Release the Snyder Cut became a mantra. It became it infiltrated pop culture in a way that like people could have used it. They used it as a punchline, but it was still getting the point across. You're still advertising the thing. So people were asking like, what is this? What is this? And when I dug deeper into the motivations of the people in the movement, and I learned that so much of it was to raise awareness for suicide prevention because of what happened with Zach's daughter. I was really moved by that. The problem with that book is that it's again a snapshot of a movement at a specific time, and that movement has evolved in some negative ways as well too. And the people who there was a significant chunk of the fan base that really just wanted to see the movie, and when they saw it, they dropped away. They kind of fell off, and what remained of the fan base was people who just kept wanting to they just wanted to keep fighting with Warner Brothers. And that wasn't the story that I wanted to tell. I wasn't really interested in that. But while telling the story and while putting it together, my intention was always going to be that the ending was going to be, hey, this if this ever happens, these are probably the people who made it come to pass. And literally 2 months before my deadline, of having to turn in a finished manuscript, HBO Max goes ahead and announces. And so what had happened is, the Warner Brothers launched a streaming service because they wanted to compete in the marketplace, and streaming service needed content, and so they agreed to release the Snyder Cut, which was insane. I still, to this day, Zach, I can't wrap my brain around the fact that I was, 95% done with a book about the Snyder Cut when the Snyder Cut got announced. And then it was like the last few dominoes fell. Like then Zack Snyder was willing to do an interview. Then I was able to interview the folks who had pushed so hard and really get closure for them of like, it's happening. What do you think? Now they didn't get to see it before I had to turn the book in, but the book had an ending, which was unreal. And that was just fate, it's fate. So I got very, very lucky of being at the right place at the right time.
It was amazing timing. It kind of reminds me of how when Catherine Bigelow was about to make Zero Dark 30, they assassinated Osama bin Laden, and she's like, I gotta change the ending now.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Only with superheroes, but yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend that people check it out. Once again, it's called Release the Snyder Cut, the crazy true story behind the fight that saved Zack Snyder's Justice League. Right after the release of that book, you jumped straight into your next project, which was about your favorite character, Spider-Man. The title is With Great Power: How Spider-Man Conquered Hollywood During the Golden Age of Blockbusters. This is my personal favorite of the three books. They're all great, but this is just my favorite subject of the three. I honestly thought I knew about most of the history of the Spider-Man film franchise, and yet I found that there was a lot of new information, not just for the older movies, but for the newer ones as well. Did you have to do a lot of research for this book, or was most of the information in your head, you just had to get it out on the page?
No, half and half. I had a lot of those anecdotes just from covering the movies over the years. Like I literally had been in the film industry, or reporting on the film industry prior to Raimi, directing the first Spider-Man film, to the point where like I wrote pieces about the Cameron script when it had happened. And so I tracked every step of his journey kind of thing. And so I had heard all these bits about, Jake Gyllenhaal almost replacing Tobey Maguire as they negotiated his salary for part two. and especially in the ramp up with the stories of Andrew Garfield's franchise, there was so much behind the scenes stuff that I found to be really fascinating. And they would be anecdotes that I would work into stories, or you'd swap stories with other journalists as you're sitting around, like, oh my God, did you hear this one about Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and all this? And then I was like, you know what? Like, there's a book here, and when you finish a book, if you have a publisher who's happy, they're like, well, what other ideas do you have? And so I was like, well, I have this idea of, telling the history of Spider-Man's films, but getting into some of the behind the scenes stuff of like stories that you might have missed. Like I wanted to focus on the Raimi's Spider-Man 4 and what it could have been, on Sony's plans for Andrew Garfield's, Amazing Spider-Man 3 and the Sinister Six movie that Drew Goddard was going to do. And as I was developing the stories about like, here's a lot of things you might not know, my publisher was like, look, man, all these other stories that you're telling me, like, I don't think casual fans know them. Like you should probably put all of them in as much as you can, like make it a complete picture. So then I was like, okay, I'll start doing as many interviews as possible. And MCU Spider-Man was going along at this time, so I was incorporating in stories of things that I'd been learning about the Tom Holland films. And I got a chance. I went to the Homecoming set down in Atlanta, and we did, reporting with, like, we were in the warehouse with Tom Holland in the sweatsuit, costume, and Michael Keaton when they do their big confrontation scene at the end where he's like, how do you think your buddy Stark paid for those toys? Like we were there shooting on that day, and so got to witness all of that. And that becomes the stuff that collapses down on him, which is the cover of, Amazing Spider-Man 33, which is like my favorite issue of all time. And then again, in this bizarro twist of fate, like as we're running up to the release of my book, the With Great Power book, there becomes this inkling rumors of, No Way Home becoming uh, a crossover of all three Spider-Men, and what might happen if that becomes the case. But this time now my deadline was well after the release of No Way Home. So we were like patiently waiting there and writing as much as we can, and then being like, if this happens, we've got a great hook for this. And but so essentially it's from the very earliest days through No Way Home. And now, the story of Spider-Man continues. We're going to get Brand New Day this summer, and it's going to be a whole nother chapter of Spider-Man stuff. So there'll always be stuff to tell about him. But I think it's a good mix of like production stories, starts and stops to the franchise, and I hope an explanation as to why I just think he's a character more so than even like a Batman, or a James Bond, who has had to endure several tests in order to get his features done, to get them made because of the Sony negotiations of it all, the running parallel to the MCU. There is an entire chapter in there dedicated to Sony's bizarre, Venom, Madam Web, Morbius franchise. I try to explain that as much as I can. There's a chapter in there about the animated Into the Spider-Verse as well too, with some interviews with Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who are good friends. And so, yeah, I mean, I've gotten to know a lot of the people involved in the franchise over the years, and am very happy with how that book turned out.
Yes, you have a lot to be proud of. It's a great one, and yeah, it has a perfect ending with No Way Home. All of it, Toby, Andrew, and Tom all coming together in that last one. I love that book, and you followed it up with Bruce Willis celebrating the cinematic legacy of an unbreakable Hollywood icon. This is not really a biography; it's more of a career retrospective and filmography analysis, which I honestly think is better because he has so many great movies that. I mean, I haven't seen and was excited to learn about. Was writing this book easier than the previous two because you had more experience going into it, or is it equally difficult every time you start a new book?
I wouldn't say easier, but it was different, and I enjoyed the process a little bit more because the previous two books were so dependent on me having to get specific interviews. And if the interviews didn't happen, the books themselves wouldn't be, they could exist, but they wouldn't be as good. If you wrote a a book about the Snyder Cut and told me that you wrote a book about the Snyder Cut, my first question to you would be like, awesome, did you get to talk to Zack Snyder? And if the person said no, then I'd be like, all right, well then your book is it's not as good as it can be. And with Spider-Man, it'd be like, okay, well, who did you get to talk to, kind of thing. And I'm lucky that I got to speak to everyone involved with the different productions. I knew I would never get Bruce. I just because what the impetus for writing this book was his announcement that he was going to retire due to his aphasia, and now it's become frontal temporal dementia. And so he was going to be out of the public eye. And he also is just someone who notoriously doesn't love to do press, and I knew I wasn't going to get him. So I did not want a book that was dependent on having to get Bruce Willis in order to make it succeed. So what I thought was, and I love Bruce Willis. He's one of my favorite actors, and that's I was like, I want to do something about him. The fact that he was retiring really moved me, and I was like, what can I do to celebrate his filmography? What can I do to celebrate his legacy? And I think that there's too many people who sort of pigeonhole him into the action movie star role, essentially, and deservedly, he's been in a number of incredible action films over the years. But I wanted to kind of break his career up into different segments to show off the sci-fi films that he did that I think are really important, from Looper to 12 Monkeys to The Fifth Element, to the work that he did with really celebrated directors, Pulp Fiction and The Sixth Sense with M. Night Shyamalan, and he worked with directors like Robert Altman over the years, and just incredible. Wes Anderson, he did some Wes Anderson film. I think that people, not that they dismiss him, the hook of the book is essentially because for a while Bruce Willis was associated with like the Planet Hollywood guys. It was like Stallone and Willis and Schwarzenegger. And I was like, try to imagine any of the other Planet Hollywood guys doing The Sixth Sense. Like it would be a joke. The movie wouldn't work, essentially. But Bruce was versatile enough that he could do Die Hard with a Vengeance, and then do The Sixth Sense right afterwards. And business savvy enough that he could say, like, I'm going to support this up and coming filmmaker in M. Night Shyamalan, who didn't have films to his name necessarily, but I want to back this movie. I love the script, and I'll take a portion of the proceeds, and then he ends up making $100 million on it because it's one of the biggest hits of all time. So so what it required was watching all 117, I want to say, of his movies, which was daunting because I wanted a capsule review at the end of a capsule review of every movie he was ever in. And so I sat through every single Bruce Willis movie that he made. And the slog of it is the last 30 to 40 of them are those direct-to-video ones that he was making, for cheap, for he'd been hired to deliver lines, in Georgia, where he's either playing, a small town detective or, police chief of some sort, or a CIA agent. That's all he, would alternate to. But prior to that, I really thought he had a career worth celebrating, and wanted to dissect it a bit.
Absolutely. I always grew up thinking of him as like an action star, and I'd obviously seen like Sixth Sense and Pulp Fiction, but when you put it all in there, I'm like, yeah, he actually was kind of a thespian. Like he took a lot of risks, and honestly, the capsule reviews are like probably my favorite part of the book.
I think I hope that it conveys the fact that he's part of a dying, if not dead breed of action star, not action star, of marquee fame. Like Denzel's still you'll go see the new Denzel, but who's an actor now that, like, because they're in it? All right, Chalamet, Zendaya. Like Zendaya powering the drama is great for her, Like I think people want to go see that because she's in it. But they're few and far between. There's not nearly as many, and Bruce was, one of the last. So
Yeah, definitely. Sir, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this episode. It was a dream come true to have one of the members of the Chuckle Club on the show. I hope to have you on again someday, maybe for your next book. You're a fantastic guest. Please tell everyone where they can follow you on social media to keep up to date with everything you have going on.
Sure. I'm mostly on Twitter, Sean underscore O'Connell. I'm on Instagram. I think it's Sean O'Connell 33. I'm on CBR. I edit more stuff on CBR than I write, and then I have a website called Sean O'Connell Books, SeanOcconnell. books, and I might have some new things to report there soon. So we'll see. So we'll see.
Ooh, awesome, awesome tease. Okay, I will put links to all of that in the description below. And I want to thank you all for listening to this episode of the Cinema Flow podcast. Do you want to sign out with Dunkirk, Larry Crown, or
Yeah.
Hubie?
Oh, I'll do Larry Crown because that's probably my favorite one.
Okay, one, two, three. Larry
Larry
Crown.
Crown.